The idea is to, for the workshop, is divided in two parts. The first part is mainly a European perspective. So let's see what are the trends in the general level. For this reason, we invited Dimitri Korpakis, Massimo Busuoli, that have worked in the Commission and for the Italian Enea and the European Energy Research Alliance. Unfortunately, Marta couldn't come because she's sick. She just called me. That's a bad news. But anyway, the first part is more on Europe. The second part that we'll discuss after the coffee break will be specifically on Brussels and the Brussels research system. So let's start with the first part, with the general perspective. That's on the outline of this first presentation. What is the framework, what we are speaking about, what are the hypotheses we want to try to propose, and what are the data and results we have from our analysis. I would like to discuss with you how to interpret if our hypothesis can be further developed and what are the policy implications. But let me start. What is the context? I think everybody speaks about globalization. We know globalization. In the case of research, the first aspect is the increase of supralocal flows. I could be a sign of globalization as being one of the Italian moving here in Belgium, and there are many. The mobility of researcher is one of the aspects. Europe is working very hard on this aspect, and in general, all the aspects on the knowledge economy that we are discussing since, let's say, the Lisbon agenda more than 10 years ago, so it's on the top of discussion even now during the crisis. But not all the territories are able to really develop highly competitive research. Top quality research cannot be spread everywhere in Europe, and there are differences. There are some areas that are where the most advanced research is able to support economic development and public policies, some others that are lagging behind. These disparities have certain evolution, and the idea is to try to explore and analyze this kind of evolution. In the study on the European research geography, we identify in the scientific literature three main analyses. We focus on the first one, the analysis of EU framework programs for joint R&D project. That is the biggest research program in Europe and the most important. In the literature, there are other studies on publication and citation across countries and patenting. But we want to focus just on FP projects. Why study FP participation? Well, there is a first methodological problem because many of the knowledge flows are don't leave tracks. While when we have a project, it means a signed contract, a formal relationship. We sit on a table and we decide to make a joint project with a university or a firms or an agency located somewhere else. Second aspect, FP calls are extremely competitive. The rate of success, it varies from 3 to 7–10% depending by areas. In the easiest call, you have just the 20% of chance to getting your proposal approved. So it's a very competitive call, and it's a good we consider this a good indicator in terms of competition, because once your proposal is approved, you receive funds to further enhance your research and keep developing your skills. Clearly, we know FP framework program is not the only research policy, and there are many others, mainly at the national level. But at the European level, this is by far the most important program. This is a bit of history for those not familiar with the framework programs. It started in 1984 with FP1. A major increase in the budget from FP4 in 1994, 1998, and basically during the 90s, the budget was significantly increased. Now with FP7, we have a 50 billion euros, so it's a quite significant amount of money. And we are now discussing the new program. It won't be FP8, but Horizon 2020. So there will be some changes. But our interest for the time being is to understand these three periods, FP5, 6, and 7. So more or less the last decade. The rationale of FP is pretty simple. We focused on the largest part of FP, which means FP cooperation. It means about 2/3 of the budget. And it's basically based on open calls for R&D projects that are open to transnational group of partners, of which at least one should be in Europe. This is a very open project. Even partners from out of Europe can participate. This is not always the case for some other research projects. So it's a very open approach, open to partnership. And the calls are based on some teams selected by the Commission and are open every year. Big program, highly competitive, but what happened in the last 10 years? Well, for the European Union, the biggest change was the enlargement in favor of new member states. It means to include from Poland to Malta, Cyprus, Baltic republics, and now even Croatia. Plus, the framework program involves also the so-called associated countries like Switzerland, Turkey, Iceland. They are also part of this program. So it's not just the EU, but it's something even bigger. In our analysis, we want to focus on two major hypotheses that for us explain the trends in the evolution for the participation in FP project. The first aspect is that research is cumulative. Once you are one of the top researchers in a certain area, because you have a highly advanced expertise on certain technologies, on certain field, you are more likely to being on the frontier. Top researcher, when they are often the best proposal because they know what are the direction for future research. Who doesn't have a real experience, for example, if I would make an application on, let's say, energy technology, I don't have any experience. I'm not an electrical engineer, and I wouldn't be able to compete with someone working in electrical engineering since 20 years. The second aspect is that calls by the EU are open. So if you have participated and you received granted for one FP project, there is not any guarantee that you will get the next one. If you have won once, even if this research is cumulative, the next call is open. And then this could determine the fact that you have other competitors that maybe have developed their skills through other research policy, not the FP. Let me make an example about Belgium. If you have a research center on energy, they've never been able to participate in FP project, but the Belgian government decided to invest a lot in this research center. They become highly competitive, and then they can access and win the FP competition. What is expected to be the results of these two forces? What we've called as a proposal, as hypothesis, the open polycentrism, which means not everybody is able to participate in FP project. So we have some centers that are more competitive, that are more able to get and win this kind of competition, further enhancing research. But this core is open to newcomers. So to stay in this core, to stay within the top most competitive areas where the best research is carried out, you have to keep on working, keep your competitiveness, because there are newcomers coming and challenging your leadership. This is the set of our analysis, a lot of data. I will explain. I know the table is very complicated, but I will explain what this means. We have selected the 3 research teams. KBB means knowledge-based bioeconomy. Let's say simply biotech, even if it includes also agriculture and food research. Energy, I think the label is clear, and environment, again. Environment includes climate change and all the green research, let's say in this way. We have been able to map all the participants at the NUTS3 level. In the case of Belgium means arrondissement. In the case of Italy means province. And this is the first time in the literature there is an analysis at the FP3, at the NUTS3 level. Usually it's NUTS2, which means regions. In the case of Belgium it's provinces. In the case of Italy it's region. In the case of Greece it's prefecture, if I'm right. But they've just reformed all the structure, so anyway. So we have all the participation. We can see there are in Europe 1,474 NUTS3 because we include all the other associated countries, Norway, Turkey, Iceland, Switzerland. We are not able to include Israel. It's the only one not into the sample. We have also all the participants from Europe or from international cooperation, which means out of the European research area, let's say US, China, Vietnam, South Africa, etc. And we can see that they change. Let me highlight what are the most important aspects of this complex table. The number of participation is quite large, so the sample, even if we include just 3 areas, it's quite significant. We have more than, we have about 10,000 participants per period. Each period is 4 years. FP5 means 1998, 2002. 2003, 2006, and for FP7 we have from 2007 to 2010. We don't have the last year, but still it's enough for the analysis. The distribution is extremely skewed, so there are few centers with a lot of participations and many places with very low participation. If we consider that the mean is 18 participation per province, but the median value is 4. So the distribution is extremely skewed. Few centers with many participation, most of the province across Europe with almost 0 participation. Difference between the teams, the 3 selected teams are quite limited. In the case of energy, there are a bit less observation. Environment, we have more observation. This is how it was structured, the program, and that's okay. The sample is still large enough. We have selected as a core a set of core, which means in this distribution, which is extremely skewed, the top 5 percentile in numbers of participation. So the city where there is the highest number of participation according to each discipline. This is for us the core. We decided top 5 percentile, which is an arbitrary threshold, but gives an idea of who are the best competitors. And we have seen that there were 29 cities that were always in the top, and more 25 that were at least once in the top 5 percentile. Because in the 3 period from FP5 to FP7 there are some changes. And let me show you these changes. These are for disciplines. The difference between teams are, okay, there is a bit of change. I'm sorry for this problem. Some changes, but quite limited. In FP6 there are less participation because there were bigger projects, less projects with bigger budget. That was a choice done by the Commission, but then in FP7 they went back, so the number of participation is more or less comparable. And again, the number of provinces participating in each program from KBB, Energy and Environment, that is this second line, is quite similar, 400-500, depending by each disciplines, but more or less we have the same size. And again, the distribution is very skewed. Few centers with very high participation, and most of the cities in Europe with very low participation. And international cooperation is growing. This is an interesting aspect. In FP5, most of the participation were within Europe, which means EU plus associated countries. Progressively, we have been able to involve more and more partners out of Europe, US, China, Brazil, etc. Okay, this is the general trend. Considering the top 5 percentile in the whole distribution, I plotted on the horizontal axis the share of FP5 participation in each area, because the number of projects and participation changed. So if there are 1,000 calls, what is the share of how many times you are able? But if the number of calls change, clearly to win 10 times in 100 calls or in 1,000 calls is different. On the vertical axis is the same, but just for for FP7, and we can see the trend. The first aspect is we have here a stable core with some key areas that are always in the top, that are always the most competitive and attracting the largest number of FP projects. The second aspect, here there is the threshold of the top 5 percentile. As I told at the beginning, it's an arbitrary measure, so we could have used the top 6 percentile or top 4. And there are many that are close to the observation, and this confirms the fact that it was an arbitrary measure. But what is interesting, we have many that are on this side or on this side, which means that are entering into the core, so from very low participation close to zero in FP5, they were able to achieve almost 0.1% in the FP7. So they've been able to increase significantly, joining the core of most competitive center for the European research area. Vice versa, we have here some observation that were very high in FP5, and they are now out of the core. Their participation in FP calls decreased significantly. If you are curious, this outlier value is Paris, where the CNRS is the major player, even if they have office all over France. If we repeat the exercise splitting by the 3 disciplines, so KBB, energy, and environment, there are little difference. There are not so many difference. We can say that energy is a bit more stable because they tend to be closer to the diagonal, while environment and biotech, there are more dispersion, but I wouldn't, but more or less, I would say that the trend is quite similar. We should consider also that for energy there are less calls, so it might be a statistical effect. What are the thematic dynamics? We identify per each teams, because you can have a city that is, or a province that is highly specialized in environment research, but they don't have any research center on energy. It might be possible. You have someone specialized in environment, climate change, forest, but not very good in biotech. That's normal. So we divided each area for the specialization in each team. We adopted a 3 threshold. the specialized, which is again the top 5 percentile, the semi-specialized, which means between 85 and 95 percentile, so the second range, and then all the others below the 85 percentile. For those that like football, we could say Champions League, UEFA, UEFA Cup, and all the others that are not in competition. Sorry for this football metaphor, but maybe it explains. And those are the second division, so no participation. It's I don't consider them. What's going on? This is another graph with a lot of number. We can see specialized provinces in each of 3 disciplines. And here is the trend considering how they have evolved on average from FP7 to FP5 in their own specialization. So this is the growth of participation for provinces specialized in biotech, their growth in biotech. For energy, this is their growth in participation in energy, etc., etc., etc. Okay? For semi-specialized provinces, these are all the provinces semi-specialized in energy, and this is how they grow in energy. Here is how they grow in the other disciplines. So if this is specialized in energy, this is their performance in energy, and these two are their growth in KBB and environment. So in the field they are not specialized in. Okay? So what are the most interesting results? Provinces specialized in certain areas are reducing their participation, while the second level cities are increasing their participation. And this is not the specificity of a certain area. So it's not just, say, energy, but it's common from biotech, energy, and environment. So it's the second ranking cities that are increasing their rate of participation according to their specialization. But there is something more. If we look to the second level cities, they are increasing also in other disciplines. So let me make this example. Here we have someone that was on the second level per research in environment, and they are growing in environment. But they are growing also in biotech and in energy. So it's an effect, we could say a kind of spillover. Once you increase in a certain area, that is your strength area, you are able to increase also in other research areas. Clearly, this is detrimental for the most competitive area that are losing. The difference between the most competitive and the second level is reducing, but it tends to be negative for all the others that are not participating. Okay, this is a synthesis of main results. I hope I should be more or less in respecting the timetable. The idea is it exists a geographical core where the most competitive research cities of Europe are. A core, it doesn't mean that they are all in the same place. They are often one country by country. But this core is stable and is the most competitive in terms of participation to FP projects. As we said at the beginning, it's not the only indicator, but it's one of the indicators. This core is open to newcomers. There is space for competitors to improve their performance in FP, in terms of FP participation. So it's not closed. This is one of the main critiques that is often said against the Commission. You are always funding the same institution, the same territories. You are always giving money to the same, always to Paris, which is the most competitive, the highest in terms of number of FP participation. It's true that Paris is one of the most competitive, where there are some of the best research centers, but this mechanism for open competition, open calls, allows other people to join this mechanism. And the situation is evolving, is changing. you cannot take for granted that if Paris is the best one, will always be the first one. Difference between disciplines seems to be very limited. Okay, maybe energy is a bit more stable, environment is a bit is a larger program and they are changing, but I wouldn't emphasize too much all this difference. The trend seems to be confirmed all over the three disciplines we consider, and this opens also the discussion for our for next steps. That would be if we enlarge the sample, if we start including life science, transport research, medicine, aeronautics, etc., will this scenario be different? That's an open question. Yeah, that's conclusion. The second step, the other question is how, if this is an indicator, FP participation is an indicator of performance. So if you win the competition for an FP project, this is your performance. But how to relate this performance with other structural indicators? What are the regional characteristics of those better performing? In the second part, so I will make you a bit of suspense, we will speak a bit of Brussels, which is one of the major centers in the core we just discussed. But it's an open question, because clearly here we're speaking about Brussels, but Europe is big. We have more than 1,400 provinces all over Europe, so, and not everybody can be Paris. Okay, this is some question open to the discussion, but I would leave to our guest, Dimitri Korpakis from the Commission, that has also a presentation if you want, and then to your reaction, and clearly from the floor if you want to open.